the things I think we have to understand is that life is more complicated now
Oh
than
yeah.
it's really ever been before. Now, I know people debate whether life is better now or worse now than it was in the past. I don't get into that. People can have their own opinions, but it's more complicated now. And that's why these relationships are all so important. Like you said, if you have an opportunity as a step parent or a friend or an aunt or an uncle or any other relationship to help a child, to be a mentor, to bring some wisdom to anyone in life, you need to do that because life is just complicated and we need to be there for each other.
Hey guys,
Great.
welcome to another episode of Mediocre Dads. I'm your host Quan. I go by Q, of course. Where being mediocre is a choice. You have to refuse to be mediocre every single day. And on this episode of Mediocre Dads, I am joined by a special guest named Mark, who is an author of a great book on speaking on relationships. And I know when you guys hear someone, oh, he wrote a book on relationships, you immediately think like, okay, 5 love languages and all those lovey-dovey books and how to love your husband, and for the wives and husbands, how to love your wife, all these things, right? You think of all these really lovey-dovey stuff, but guys, relationships are not just between man and woman, and the husband and the wife relationship or boyfriend girlfriend relationship. There's the relationships that we form, whether they're at work, the relationships we form with our kids, the relationships we form with our family members. Relationships, we're always building relationships, or sometimes they're breaking down. So he's here to talk about all that and so much more. So I'm really excited for today's episode. But before I get too much and I start hogging the mic, I'm going to let Mark introduce himself. So, hey, Mark, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you. So glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm Mark. I am an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a counselor and relationship specialist. And I gave myself that last title after I wrote my book. It's Learning Love, Building a Life That Matters, and Healthy Relationships That Last. And you're exactly right. Relationships build our life in every area, whether it's our spouse or our partner or children or family or coworkers. We're in relationships all the time. And building those relationships builds our life. If we want a life that matters, it's going to be because we have relationships that are solid, that last, and that are fulfilling in our life. And if we want to have those relationships, we need a life that matters. We need to put ourselves into a place that we can build those relationships. And just like you said, we have certain ideas when we think about love and relationships. Everybody thinks it's, bubble gum and butterflies, that it's
Mm-hmm.
always sweet and beautiful. That's part of it. Yeah, we hope so. But there's a lot more to it. And what I want people to understand is love is a learned skill set. It is something anyone can learn, even if you came from a dysfunctional family, which a lot of people do, even if you've been through a divorce, even if you've been through relationship trauma. You can learn how to build healthy, happy, thriving relationships. And that's what I want everybody to have.
That's awesome. So diving right into it, what led you to want to write a book on relationships, right? Because, it's when you're gonna when a person sits down to write a book, and I say this as a person who has sat down and thought about writing a book before, you're thinking to yourself like, okay, what am I going to write about? And if I'm going to when I choose that topic, do I have enough to say on that topic in which I can put into a book that people are going to want to read, and two, that's going to convey a message that people are going to understand, right? So what led you to say, hey, I'm going to write a book and I want it to be on relationships?
Well, one of the big motivators for me came earlier in my life when I didn't know as much as I know now. And I ended up in a first marriage that was a toxic relationship. It was
Mm.
an absolute disaster. It ended in divorce. I still have the emotional scars to show for that. And I was raised in a good, healthy home. I had great parents. I'm very fortunate to be raised in such a wonderful family that really treated me well and really didn't have a frame of reference for just how dysfunctional life can get and how toxic relationships can get. And I was also raised in a religious background. And so when
Yeah.
I went into marriage early in life, I believed it was forever, till death do us part. And I was committed to that. But then I found myself in such a toxic relationship. Everything fell apart over the years and ended in a divorce. And that sort of planted some seeds. I didn't fully understand that at the time, but looking back, I can see that what I wanted to do is understand what love is. How do we
Mm.
build that? It's not just random. It's not just a fantasy. It's not just something that you sort of fall into. It is a learned skill set. And I wanted to learn that. I wanted to learn what love was and how to build healthy relationships. And that, along with a number of other aspects to my life, I'm a counselor, have a master's degree in mental health counseling. I
Awesome.
also have been involved in faith-based work in churches and mission work, mission projects, things of that nature, and nonprofits as well. And so while a lot of those two career paths have stayed separate for me a lot of the times, sometimes they converge. For instance, I was the director of a recovery program, an addiction recovery program for several years, and it was a faith-based program, but it also involved a lot of therapy, a lot of counseling. And so they sort of merged there at that place. And that's what this book ended up being. It ended up being merging of my own personal desires to learn what love was. And once I started understanding what love is and how to build it, I wanted to share that. I
Mm.
didn't want to keep that a secret. I wanted to share that with anybody that would listen. And coming from my counseling background, from a background of therapy, from a faith-based spiritual background, all that merges together into who we are, how we live together, and how we build those relationships of love. Once I started understanding that, that's just something I had to share.
That's awesome. Our experiences definitely, and I think you could attest to this as well. Our experiences definitely help build or destroy, but hopefully after the some time, builds the person who we are, and hopefully that's a better person than we were before. Now, it's unfortunate sometimes that we have to go through these terrible events to get to
Yeah.
that this new person, if you but they definitely help. These experiences definitely help build and grow us in a lot of ways. And so for you with the you were in a toxic relationship, kind of speaking from the male or the man perspective, especially for my dads in particular. What did that toxic relationship look like, right? Because we hear that a lot, especially nowadays. I think that term, or that statement, if you will, has become it's a newer statement. It's not to say that we didn't know what it was back then, but it's like being able to put a word, to associate a word with something, saying like that's it, that's what it's been called this entire time. We just didn't have a good word for it. And a toxic relation, a toxic, right, is the perfect word for it. And so, can you kind of explain kind of what that looked like, right? Because for some people, they may not know that they're in a toxic relationship, or for some they do, but they're like, nah, I'm going to stay here. But for those who don't know, can you kind of explain your own personal experiences, what that looked like?
It is difficult for a lot of people because relationships do go through difficult times, and no relationship is perfect. I'm remarried now. I have a wonderful relationship. I often say that I've had a bad marriage and a good marriage, and good is better.
Yeah.
And I want to shoot for good. But when we're in those bad relationships, they're not bad every minute. We got
Mm.
into them for a reason. There were elements, those moments of hope. And it's very difficult sometimes to sort out your feelings and understand what you're in at the time.
Mm.
I think it's very difficult from a male perspective to talk about toxic relationships. It's difficult to say, I'm being mistreated in this relationship. For men, sometimes it's just, you just take it,
Yeah.
you just tough it out. You don't want to admit that you're being mistreated. You don't want to admit that there is abuse going on, or emotional type of mistreatment. That's hard for men to say out loud, and I kept that secret for a long time. I didn't tell anyone. I made it into a noble thing. I
Mm.
believe that I was being dedicated to the marriage, and
Yeah.
I was by not airing that dirty laundry, by not criticizing, by not telling anybody that how bad things were. I thought I was being noble and I was being faithful to my wife, and that I was also being egotistical because
Mhm.
I believed, because I was strong enough and smart enough and would work hard enough, that I would find a way to fix this. And the problem with that statement is that
Yeah.
I would find a way to fix it. Relationships, you have to have two people working at the relationship, and you have to have people trying to get to a healthy place.
Mhm.
There's a lot of ways you could define toxic, and one of those ways is, in my experience, we never fixed one single thing. In the
Dang.
years we were together in that relationship, one fight led to another, and not one single thing was ever resolved. There was never a conversation that led to something being different. It was always just a fight to lead to the next fight. And I was always in that place of trying to hope we could find a way to discuss or argue or whatever it took to get to a better place. And it never happened. It took me years to realize I'm either going to live with this or I'm going to have to leave.
Mhm.
And ultimately, I realized that it wasn't losing the relationship that was the worst part. I was losing myself.
Yeah.
That I didn't know who I was anymore. And that's what happens in a toxic relationship. You start forgetting who you are and the person you want to be and the person you can be. You lose yourself in all of that. So the thing I would say, mistake I made, was I kept it secret. For what I thought were noble reasons, I didn't tell anyone. And that was a huge mistake. If you even think that you're involved in a toxic relationship, tell someone, talk to a friend, or talk to a therapist. That's your best scenario there, that can help you work through things. And sometimes men are hesitant to do that. They get into this place where they think they ought to figure everything out for themselves, and that's just not the case. We go to a doctor if we're having a physical ailment. We go to a dentist if we're having a toothache. We go to a mechanic if our car is not running right. We ought to go to a therapist if we're struggling in relationships and emotional struggles. Those are the people there to help us with those struggles. Find someone, a therapist, counselor, coach, or at least a friend or family member that you can talk to, and let them know what's happening and get some perspective. Don't live in those toxic relationships, and don't just try to tough everything out.
It's crazy because I think a lot of people, like you said, especially men, they do that thing of we're just gonna tough whether it's our mental or our bodies, if you will, have a way of forcing these things out. You know what I mean? Where just it's kind of like like a cup of water, right? You can only put so much water in that cup before it's just overfilling, and then before, hey, it's been overfilling, and now it's just the glasses break. No, I personally, I've been in I remember being in a place where when I first got married, where I thought being a man was, you internalize everything. You just internalize it, and you don't really talk about it with anybody, and if you have a group of friends, of boys that you hang out with, or whatever the case might be, you might be able to talk to them about it. But if they're not where you are in life, then
Yep.
they're not going to be able to help you, because all their advice is just going to be from the perspective of a single person, or a person who's not who doesn't have kids yet. You know what I mean? And so
Yep.
it's not to say that their advice is not valuable. It's just to say, hey, we're at different points in our life, and so it's hard to kind of come to you and say, hey, man, this is what I'm struggling with A, B, and C, D, E, F, G. But I remember, so one of my best friend, one of my best friends, he has 3 brothers, 4 brothers, 5 brothers. Man, he has a lot of brothers. They had like 7 kids, but I'm thinking about it. All of them are coming out. But one of his brothers, he's a little bit older than I am, but we got married at around the same time. So I got married when I was 19 years old, and he was in his 20s already. Got married. I happened to be home visiting, and it's his dad's. It's his dad's birthday, so I'm at their house. We're hanging out, whatever the case might be, and I'm talking to his brother. And, of course, when 2 men who are, especially younger men who are married, one thing leads to another. Next thing you know, you start asking questions, and then, the questions start turning into, my wife does that too. No, listen, when you're sitting there and then next thing you know, they're like, yes, I don't understand why they do this, and then we're it's exciting to hear, another person who understands your,
Yeah.
and you're just like, oh my gosh, let me tell you this story. And he's like, let me tell you what happened to me when I did that. You know what I mean? And and it was great to kind of finally just decompress and have that conversation, because it was us realizing we both needed that, rather than just internalizing everything. It was finding a community or finding a person who could relate to you, and then realizing like, oh my goodness, I have a person who I can speak to and who understands what I'm talking about. And so anytime I get on I play duty, as much as I can, still get in trouble for it, but and he gets on, and we'll start talking, and his younger brother, who is my best friend, will be playing with us, but we'll be talking about our wives the entire time. Not in a bad way, but just kind of like, hey, like, oh man, how long do you got before you're going to get kicked off? He's like, well, I don't know. She's trying to put the kids in the bath right now. I might have to step away for like 20 minutes, which turns into about 45 minutes to an hour, which means he's not coming back. But we're like, okay, so we got about 20 minutes before you're really going to get yelled at. So, all right, let's make the most of it. You know what I mean? And so it's just one of those things. But yeah, my point is, internalizing doesn't help. It doesn't help. It doesn't do anything. And it makes things worse, because now you're making, at least for me, I was making assumptions about certain situations that didn't exist. I was creating this lie, if you will, about this happened when those things didn't actually happen. But I was just assuming, like, if I do this, then this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen. And then now I'm so down deep in this rabbit hole of this fake story that I created. I'm believing 40% of the story, and when none of it is actually true. It's crazy. So for you, right? After your divorce, what was that time like before, when you're like, almost, I guess you can call it soul searching. I'll call it soul searching. I don't know if that's what it was,
Yeah.
but if you want to call it that, soul searching, what was that like for you? Was it as hard as, some people, was it as hard as we've seen, where some people, it just doesn't seem like they're ever able to recover? Or was it like a fresher breath air, kind of, you were like, hey, not to disparage your ex-wife, but just kind of like, hey, I'm no longer in this place where I have to feel so tense all the time. And so it's kind of it was a relaxed feeling. What was it like for you?
It was both. It sort of fluctuated for a long time. There were a lot of times that it was, and it always was a relief. Yes, to not
Yeah.
have to walk on eggshells, to not have that tension was a tremendous relief. And coming to grips with the idea that because I developed a way of toughing it out, a way of forcing myself to be strong, I didn't really realize fully how bad it was until I was out for a while
Yeah.
and started sort of decompressing and realizing. And that's why it is so important not to internalize things. It's so important not to keep secrets, because we adjust to whatever we have to adjust to. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes those adjustments are not doing us any favors. It was a tremendous relief. But then, yeah, at the same time, there's a sense of failure. There's a sense of disappointment. There's a sense of wondering, am I ever going to have a relationship? Am I going to be alone forever? And so, and there was a time that I really spent a lot of time looking at what I had done wrong. It's really easy to blame your ex. And that may be legit. I make it a policy to never, specifically criticize my ex-wife with any specific stories. But I could easily point the finger of blame.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you can honestly tell yourself it was 99% their fault, you still need to look at what you did. You still
Yeah.
need to look at the mistakes you made, what you could have done different. Maybe it wasn't wrong, but there's nuances to things. You could do something right, but maybe you could do it better
Mm-hmm.
next time. There's ways to work through that. And so I spent a lot of time doing that, looking at the way, if I am in a relationship again, I want to do things differently. I want to approach things differently. And I don't want to be in a relationship at all unless I know it can be an unhealthy one. Because so many times when we blame our ex, we're so quick to jump into another relationship, just assuming because it's a different person, it'll be a different relationship. That's
Yeah.
not necessarily true. if you're getting into a different relationship, you have to be different this time. Even if you
Yeah.
can legitimately look at your ex and think it was majority of their fault or all their fault up to 99%, you still need to make some changes in yourself to be better in a relationship, to not go in with all that tension, to not go in with the defensiveness or fear. And it took me a while to work through all of that, where I felt like I could be in a relationship without being defensive, without being tense, without being worried. And like I said, every relationship has its struggles, but it's a lot different when you're in a healthy, happy, thriving relationship and you have the confidence of knowing how to build that. It's so much different than living day to day, walking on eggshells, just hoping to keep it together.
Yeah. You know, I one, I think that's great. I think it's awesome that you were able to, to kind of reach that peace, because, as men and as leaders of our home, as we try to be leaders, especially if you have kids and you want to, and you want to be that strong male figure in your home that is that of you. And, the burden is heavy, and it can be heavy, and it's a burden that I tell people all the time that I'm willing to take on. But man, sometimes it's just like, man, I just want to drop this burden and just be at peace for a while, and then I'll gladly pick it back up again. But if when you drop it, you're like, who picks it back up for me? Who's there to, who picks that up? Who
Yeah.
do I hand this off to? And you're like looking around, and you're like, but if I hand this to her, I can't do that. If I I can't hand it to my kids, obviously, and it's a heavy burden to have. But again, I tell people all the time, I love that burden. But again, I pray sometimes that I could get that peace that I think all people need in some sort for some fashion. And I think, and for you and what you're talking about, I think that was a way to find your peace, but especially prepares you for the next chapter in your life, right? Because we're always moving forward. Time never goes backwards as much as we wish that it could. It never goes backwards; it always goes forward. And so, for you, when you get to this, they're in the new relationship you are now. You're married, happily married now.
Yes.
Did you have?
I did not. We had no children.
Okay.
But I got 3 boys when I married my wife
Oh,
now,
awesome.
and they were 9, 11, and 13 when we married.
Mhm.
So I sometimes say I had triplets because they all came to me on the same day.
That's awesome.
But I had the unique challenge of helping her raise teenagers, which was fun.
Yeah.
Difficult at times, as you imagine, but it's we're all those mediocre dads. We try really hard, and we struggle along the way. We make a lot of mistakes, and I can say now the boys are grown and they've turned out great. So all the credit goes to my wife, and I stood and watched her
That's
do a great
awesome.
job.
So, what was the relationship building like with you for that, within stepping into that relationship with them? Obviously, getting married to their mom, that relationship is different. It looks different. But now you're
Mhm.
not only forming a relationship with her, you're forming a relationship with these 3 young boys at the time that you guys got married. So what was it like for you? What was that relationship like? How did you build on that relationship, and some of the ups and downs that you might have experienced throughout the time that they were growing up?
Yeah, one of the things that I had to come to grips with, because I was raised in a pretty traditional home. My dad's a very strong man, a great man, and I really admire tremendously. A strong man, pretty typical, alpha male kind of guy, and I always just expected that's the way men ought to be, and that's playing into these ideas, like we said, about internalizing and being the leader and being a lot of things. And there's nothing wrong with any of it. That's perfectly fine, but what I had to come to grips with was the question, who made all these rules
Yeah.
about what men should be? They're just there in society, and we never really ask why. Where did this come from, and who made this rule? And I had to really wrestle with some of that, because when you're brought into a family as a stepfather, especially when the boys were 9, 11, and 13, those are some volatile ages, and they're moving into those
Mhm.
teenage years. And I have so much respect for my wife as a mom. She just did a tremendous job as a single mother, and and I just didn't want to mess anything up. I wanted to support her. And so I really had to not bring a preconceived notion of what I was supposed to be as a father, as a male figure, as a husband, any of those things. As I came into this, I had to really learn and listen and pay attention. And sometimes I did a good job of that. Sometimes I fell back on my old ways, but that was what I had to come to grips with, was who made these rules and why. And I never had a good answer to that. And so I really just had to put a lot of that stuff aside. And one of the things I told my wife early on, I said, with the kids, I think it's got to be their decision. I'll be whatever they want me to be. They want me to be dad, I'll be dad. They want me to be friend, I'll be friend. I'll certainly make sure she's supported, and I'll certainly make sure they're guided as much as I can. But I didn't want to come in with any preconceived notion of what I wanted as a stereotype or what I think I should, because they have so many dynamics. And you still have the father in their life. The biological father is there, and that's an important aspect as well. And those dynamics are difficult because they were divorced, and so that's a difficult dynamic. It may be different if a father passes away or something like that. That may be a different scenario if you're coming into that family. But in my wife's case, she was divorced, and so these are all very difficult dynamics. And so I would just encourage folks to wrestle the same way I did of who made these rules, why are we following all these stereotypes as men, and instead sort of listen and figure out what actually works for us in our situation and do that.
Yeah, that is a crazy thing, because I have thought about that as well, of like, who determined that to be a man or to be a dad and to be the leader of your home, that meant you had to be the authoritarian in the home, right? Like let's just be honest. The mom is usually better at being an authoritarian because in a typical or traditional home, she's the one who's the time with the kids. And so she's the one who's usually yelling a lot more than dad is. You know what I mean? So, but then dad is expected when he comes home is like, hey, go get your kids. They're freaking acting up. And you're like, I wasn't for any of that, but I guess I'll go. It's kind of like, you write my checks. Yeah, let me. Yeah, I'm here to punish you. What did he do again? Oh, he was disrespectful. Yeah. Got it. You were disrespectful. You're grounded for a week. What did he do? Got it. Okay. You know what you did. You know what I mean? You're going down the line. You're just like, listen, guys, she writes the checks. I'm just here to enforce, the rules. Shame on you. Do better. But it's not to say that dads shouldn't take on that, be willing to take on that role. But it is, it's one of those things where it's like, the expectations. It's like, where did these expectations come from? Who created these things, or why did this become such a norm? But what do I do appreciate? One thing I do appreciate about stepdads, or someone who's falls in the category of stepdads, is you've been given an opportunity, whether you had kids before or you didn't, but you're now given an opportunity to be an additional male mentor in these young men, especially young men, if you have sons, but daughters as well. You're now a mentor for these young kids in their life. You're an additional mentor, right? Because if they still have their biological father in their life, which is great, and it doesn't mean you have to take on that role as dad, but that's what you now an additional mentor for these kids to help them grow and give them a new perspective that they maybe didn't have before. They're not be given from their biological dad or their biological mom. So it works out where it's like, hey, I'm an additional, not an enforcer, but an additional person here to kind of help you raise some really solid and great, awesome kids. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to help the kids and help raise them and take care of them so they can become adults and be able to take care of themselves. And you don't have that worry of like, oh my gosh, did I do a good job or did I not do a good job? Did I tell them everything I needed to know, or did I teach them everything I know? And are they going to be able to implement it the way I would do it? Like, all these concerns and this worry that goes in our minds. But if we're able to just say, hey, look, I did the best I can, which I hope your best is really your best, then, most of the time our kids come out good, and that doesn't mean your parenting stops when they turn 18. That means, that parenting is for the rest of your life. And that's one thing that I didn't realize. My wife was, I came home one day from work and, man, I don't know if it's all wives, but she talks to her mom every single day. And shout out to Trish because she watches every single episode that. Oh, shout out to her. I love you. But like,
hello, Trish.
Y'all talk every day. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what y'all be talking about, but y'all talk every day. And so she calls her mom. She talks to her mom every single day, and I'm just like, that's great. Like, I love it. And in some way, it's their maternal relationship that she's able to help in a way continue to parent her daughter. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. But for me, I don't talk to my parents like that often. Like, I talk to my mom and my dad maybe like, and this is gonna sound bad, like I'll be very frank, like twice a month. And it's not like it's not like I don't love them and I don't want to see them. It's just I'm a very busy person, and my dad's a busy person as well. He flies for Southwest, and then my mom, she's got her thing going on where she's rocking around in the community, in the neighborhood, and kind of getting all the people together, hanging out or not. But I say all to say because parenting doesn't stop when you're 18 and if your kids leave the nest, if you will, and they're like, all right, bye mom, bye man, bye dad, I guess you're no longer my parents now. I'm gonna go figure out the world by myself. No, like I've had so many times where I've called my dad and I've been like, hey, listen, how do I do this? I called my dad the other day about helping me fix a fence, and but even my father-in-law, like I said, he's not taking the place of my dad. He's an additional male mentor that I have in my life where I could call him as well. And I say, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. Can you help me? And sometimes he might be a better person to answer the question that I'm looking for than my dad will, and it's not to any hit on my dad, but that's just the reality is. And I think that's the best thing, the greatest thing about stepdads is because they are able to step in that role of like, hey, I don't need to take over as your dad, but I can also tell you about my experiences and give you some insight to life that maybe you haven't thought of before, if no one's ever taught you before. And that's the best part about it all. And so if you had to surmise it all, right, what would you say most important relationship is, right? Because you got your relationship with your kids, you got the relationship with your spouse or your partner, you have the relationship with your coworkers, which sometimes, right? And then you have your relationship with in your family.
Yeah, one of the things I think we have to understand is that life is more complicated now than it's really ever been before. Now, I know people debate whether life is better now or worse now than it was in the past. I don't get into that. People can have their own opinions, but it's more complicated now. And that's why these relationships are all so important. Like you said, if you have an opportunity as a step parent or a friend or an aunt or an uncle or any other relationship to help a child, to be a mentor, to bring some wisdom to anyone in life, you need to do that because life is just complicated and we need to be there for each other. As far as the most important relationship, I think if we do have a partner, we have a spouse, that's really got to be the priority. And I know the kids need to be a priority, but the great thing about kids is they will make themselves a priority.
Yes.
They're going to get their share of attention. There's not going to be any sitting by and waiting to see if they get attention. They will get it. Mm-hmm. And so our spouse is not necessarily wired up that way. Yeah. They're a mature adult, or at least an adult. And so we're going to have to make that a priority on purpose because that kid's going to scream and throw things if they need to get our attention. Hopefully, our spouse is not like that. Our spouse might be more patient, understanding, and wait, but they're not going to be able to wait forever. They need supported too. And we need their support. And so as important as those relationships are with children, I would say make sure you have that relationship with your spouse and let your kids see that because they're learning how to have relationships in their adult life from you as parents. And so let them see you making that marriage a priority, even sometimes over the immediate needs of the kids. And like I said, don't worry about the kids getting attention. They'll get their attention. And then make sure that other relationships are a priority as well. Not as high a priority, obviously, as your spouse, but all relationships are important. We need friendships. We need to make connections with our coworkers as much as possible. Work's work. And sometimes every job's a grind. Yeah. But it's a better world and it's a better life. It's a better way to make a living if we can go to work every day and connect with some people and have good, healthy relationships. And that's what I teach in my book is that those are all the same principles. They're applied differently. The priority is your spouse. They're applied differently to other relationships. Friendships and coworkers are not the same priority or the same intensity as your spouse or your children, but they're all the same principles. And if we're learning the components of how to build relationships, we can build them in all areas in that understanding of what's our priority, but also other things in life are important too. And we need relationships in every area to be fully well-rounded and healthy, happy people.
Yeah. So how do you, you mentioned that the most important one is probably going to be that significant other, that partner of yours. So how do you prioritize, or what advice would you give to parents, especially who has their spouse or their significant other as that number one relationship they want to build on? But, you know, as you mentioned, kids are going to want their attention too. And when they want it, they want it. I'll give y'all a prime example. As we're currently sitting here recording right now, I don't know if any of y'all have heard it in the background. It's audio that it will be edited out. But my 1.5-year-old, almost 2-year-old, has been screaming my name this entire time. She is downstairs saying, "Dad, Dad, Dad." And so like she's I walked in the house. I was very busy, came home, came up here, had to do what I'm doing. But she's been screaming my name the entire time. Listen, y'all, kids are going to get their attention because once we're done here, I got to go back downstairs, you know, give them a hug, kiss, whatever. But kids are going to get their attention, or they're going to force you to look at them, or at least hear them. And so what do you tell parents, especially like, hey, how do you prioritize that significant other have kids, especially multiple kids, where it's like, hey, it's pretty difficult to even get a date night. So how do I show that person that they are a priority for me and that I do care about this relationship and I do
things count. You can't just spend the time that you did when you were dating, have those romantic date nights and things like that. Those may not be, like you said, it's hard to find time for even a date night. Make it a priority. Do it if you can, but little things count in the long run. And so 5 minutes of just conversation. How did your day go? Paying attention of when somebody's upset about something, listen to them. Listen to your partner, and just saying something nice or doing something nice or sending a note or an email or just little things count. And because you're dealing with such big things, you're trying to pay bills, you're trying to deal with the kids that, you know, sometimes just keeping them alive seems to be a challenge because they're constantly finding ways to hurt themselves. And especially when they're little and when they're teenagers, they're trying to find ways to destroy themselves. And it's just such a challenge. And it doesn't seem like sending an email saying, you know, hey, I'm thinking about you. I love you. I know we haven't had time lately, but, you know, I want you to know you're still my priority. Those kinds of things may not seem like much at the time, but you do that consistently over time, it keeps that connection. And you're not always going to be in that place. You know, when you have a 2-year-old screaming at you, it seems like that's never going to end. But you're not always going to be at that place. And so what you're doing is planting seeds for later. You're just, those little emails, those notes, those, you know, that 10 minutes you get before you fall asleep and you're actually connecting a little bit. The date night that you get every now and then because you got a babysitter that may be hard to afford, may be hard to find good ones, but you find one every now and then, even if it's once a month or once every 3 months, whatever it is. As much as you can, get those date nights in when you can, but you're stringing those little seeds together. You're planting those seeds over time, and you're not always going to be at the place you are now. And there's going to be other times. The kids are going to be more independent later when they're 20 than they are at 2. That doesn't mean you're not parenting. Like you said, there's still connections, there's still things to do, but it's not the same. And so keep those seeds planted, keep those little things. Little stuff counts.
That's awesome. You know, I saw my father-in-law doing this thing, some time with them, with the family or with her family, and an opportunity to leave, if you will, where I could be gone for some time. And my father-in-law does this thing where he will just out of the blue, he'll show up with flowers And, it's a little gesture, and it's a common gesture, right? But like she appreciates it, right? And it's funny because he'll do this thing where he'll show up flowers with her, and then he'll be like, "Hey, Quan, can you come help me unload the car for I went to the store or whatever." And here's this man, he has flowers for me to give to my wife, which is his daughter, right? Flowers for me to give to, at the time I only had one daughter, to my oldest daughter. And he'd be like, "All right, now you can go give them to the girls, right? Here's your flowers."
He is a good man.
But what's funny is why he did that, and we all know he's the one who got the flowers, right? It's kind of like, okay, I got it now. You're instilling something in my head here. If you have some flowers, you're like, you know what? She would like those. Grab them. Doesn't hurt. So like I'll be at work, and I'll be coming home late some nights and some evenings, and I'll stop, pick some stuff up, and I'll grab some flowers for all three of my girls. And I'll come home and I'll give them all their flowers. And my oldest, she really appreciates it, because for her, she's like, "Oh my gosh, Dad was thinking about me, and he got me these beautiful flowers. I love these flowers." For Valentine's Day, I got all of my girls flowers, my wife and my two daughters. I got them. Just that small act, like you said, planting the seeds, just to let them know, like, "Hey guys, I haven't forgotten about you," right? However, the flowers like my daughters are very different from the flowers I get from my wife. What do I mean by that? I might get like a single flower or like a few flowers for my daughters, but like, hey, like, you're the priority. This is all you right here. Excuse me. And so like that is my way of kind of just letting her know, like, hey, you're still a priority. I still love you, and I appreciate our relationship that we have, and I hope it continues to grow, even if we continue to have more.
Yeah, that takes zero amount of time. People say, "I just don't have time to go on a date night." It takes zero amount of time. You're at the store anyway.
Yeah.
It takes very little money. You don't have to be wealthy to pick up some flowers. They don't cost a whole lot. And so those little things like that, they make a big difference in relationships. The relationships fall apart for a lot of reasons, but there's plenty of folks that when you ask them what happened, why is your relationship in trouble, they say, "I don't know. It's just we drifted apart." It can't really say one specific thing. It's not that somebody cheated in the relationship, or it's not that there was physical abuse. It's just that it wasn't a relationship after a while. It just faded. And that's really easy to do. But it's also really easy to prevent that when we just do the little things. It takes almost no time. It takes 10, 20 seconds to send an email. It takes 10 seconds to write a Post-it and take a note on a Post-it note, put it on the mirror. It takes almost no time to do these things, but it makes such a difference over the course of time. And relationships, when they are healthy and thriving, are meant to be decades.
Yeah.
That's what they're for. They're meant to last. There's meant to be healthy relationships that last. And so don't get caught up in the moment of how things are going. Plant those seeds for the future and let those things grow over time. And over the decades, it makes a huge difference.
That's awesome. Well, hey guys, super happy about this episode. Mark, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for breaking different aspects of relationships, because again, I think it's so essential, not only for just for everyday life, but especially for dads who are, one, internalizing, and two, just kind of going through the motions with their significant other, with their spouse. And it's like, no, like, this is an opportunity for you to realize, or hopefully realize and see that, like, you are with a person that you said you were going to commit your life to. And, remember that moment when she was coming down the aisle in her dress, and how you felt about her and everything that was going on. It was almost like it was only you two in that moment right there. I try to tell people, it's like, think back to that moment of how you felt. All right. Because I know most people can remember that feeling. Okay. Now you have just a small piece of that feeling there. Okay. Now apply that to today. What could you do today to get that feeling back today, between whether it's just you or even your wife feels it, but what can you do for yourself to give for your wife to get that small little feeling to know, like, hey man, we're still going. So hey guys, I appreciate it checking us out. Mark, thank you for coming on. Mark, before we go,
best place to go is my website. It's markahicks.com. Make sure to get my middle initial in there. So it's M-A-R-K. My middle initial is A, H-I-C-K-S, markahicks.com. There's easy links there to my books that are on Amazon. I have a podcast. I have a YouTube channel, TikTok. You can get easy links to everything. Plus a contact form is there. If you'd like to have me speak at an event, I'm a public speaker. Love to do that. I do some coaching. So just get in touch with me through my contact on my website. Love to be of service any way I can. markahicks.com.
Awesome. Hey guys, don't worry. All of his stuff will be in the description below, so you can check that out. Because of course, it's not about me so much, but it's also about the guests. Because they come on here, they take the time to sit here and talk to me and give you all this wonderful information, guys. So hey, don't worry. All this stuff will be in the description. Again, Mark, thanks for joining us, guys. I'm Q, host of Mediocre Dads. We're for you guys. Mediocre Dads.